In an era of complex trade relations between the United States and Canada, where tensions are escalating like an impending storm, President Trump unexpectedly extends an olive branch. A reprieve, like a fleeting truce, postpones the imposition of 25% tariffs on Canadian goods until April 2nd. In response, the Canadian government expresses cautious optimism, delaying the implementation of retaliatory measures until April 7th, while maintaining the initial tariffs on American goods. Meanwhile, the province of British Columbia is developing legislation that would allow for the imposition of fees on commercial vehicles traveling to Alaska. Premier David Eby expressed hope that this action would send a clear message to the president and Alaskan politicians. British Columbia authorities intend to ensure that environmentally friendly additives for gasoline and diesel fuel are produced exclusively within Canada. The legislative initiative will also equip the province with new tools to eliminate internal trade barriers, which is particularly important as the country strives for greater economic independence from the United States. Despite the Trump administration's slight reduction in tariffs in trade with North American partners, Canadian authorities emphasize the need to maintain retaliatory measures. According to Eby, Canada has no intention of tolerating ongoing threats and uncertainty in trade relations. He stressed that protecting the interests of Canadians is a priority and such behavior on the part of the U.S. is unacceptable. Eby affirmed Canada's firm stance, emphasizing that the country will not back down until the U.S. president removes the threat of new tariffs. Although the immediate implementation of tolls is not planned and the number of trucks affected is relatively small, this move is a clear signal of growing tensions between long-standing allies. Canada is increasing pressure on the Trump administration, seeking to abandon the tariff plan that could damage economic relations between the two countries. In response to the trade war unleashed by the White House, which no one desired, the government of British Columbia intends to mount a strong resistance. Premier Eby stated that the measures taken will be just the first step in protecting the economy from this ongoing economic aggression, with additional tools to be presented in the coming weeks. The bill on tariff countermeasures, which is scheduled to be introduced in the coming days, will provide the province with new mechanisms to protect jobs and businesses, as well as to respond quickly to problems arising from the trade war initiated by the Trump administration. The proposed measures include eliminating interprovincial trade barriers to strengthen British Columbia's internal economy, requiring low-carbon fuel additives for gasoline and diesel fuel to be produced exclusively in Canada, and introducing fees or charges for American commercial vehicles using the province's infrastructure for transit to Alaska. Premier Eby emphasized that the imposition of tariffs is a serious miscalculation by the Trump administration, harming families and businesses on both sides of the border. The government of British Columbia demonstrates an unwavering commitment to the interests of its citizens, considering all possible strategies to protect their well-being. The first step in this fight was the decision by the BC Liquor Distribution Branch to cease purchasing alcoholic beverages from states that support a particular political line, leading to the disappearance of these brands from the shelves of provincial stores. In addition to this, government agencies and corporations in British Columbia have been instructed to prioritize Canadian goods and services, thereby strengthening the domestic economy. These measures are part of a large-scale Team Canada strategy, which includes the federal government's imposition of 25% tariffs on $155 billion worth of imports from the U.S., as well as similar steps by other provinces and territories aimed at reducing dependence on American trade. British Columbia is not limited to protective measures, actively developing new markets and accelerating the approval process for major investment projects. The first wave of such projects, valued at $20 billion, promises to create approximately 8,000 jobs, particularly in rural and remote areas of the province, demonstrating the government's commitment to the equitable distribution of economic opportunities. In response to economic challenges, Premier Eby has taken the initiative to create a specialized task force on trade and economic security. Its membership includes prominent representatives from business, labor, and Indigenous communities, underscoring the commitment to a comprehensive and coordinated approach. In parallel, to safeguard the region's food security, an agricultural and food economy task force was formed to ensure stable food supplies in British Columbia. The ongoing softwood lumber dispute has also been addressed. The British Columbia Lumber Trade Council is actively developing a diplomatic and trade strategy to protect the province's interests in this matter. To coordinate all these efforts, a special cabinet committee has been established to oversee the government's comprehensive response. These decisive steps demonstrate British Columbia's commitment to protecting its economy, workforce, and businesses from the potential negative impact of U.S. tariffs, with a focus on strengthening trade ties and enhancing the region's long-term economic resilience. In the context of these events, the role of Canada comes into question. Canada plays a strategically important role in providing a link between Alaska and the rest of the United States. Alaska, being a geographical exclave, does not have direct land access to the continental U.S., making Canadian territory a key transit corridor. The sprawling Canadian lands located between Alaska and the mainland United States play an indispensable role as a transit corridor for travelers, trade routes, and vital infrastructure. One of the most significant links connecting Alaska to the other 48 states is the legendary Alaska Highway, also known as the Alcan Highway. This strategically important road originates in Dawson Creek, British Columbia, and stretches to Delta Junction, Alaska. Built during World War II to provide a reliable supply route for military needs, this highway remains a critical land artery connecting Alaska to the rest of America. Despite modernization and improvements over the past decades, a significant portion of the route runs through rugged and sparsely populated terrain. This forces travelers to travel hundreds of miles through Canada before they can reach Alaska. In addition to road transport, air travel also relies heavily on Canada's geographical location. Many flights between Alaska and other U.S. states pass through Canadian airspace, and some even make stopovers in Canadian cities. The Canadian Air Traffic Control System plays an indispensable role in navigating aircraft flying between Alaska and various destinations within the United States. Close cooperation between U.S. and Canadian aviation authorities ensures the smooth operation of these busy air routes. Trade and commercial links further underscore Canada's strategic importance as a link between Alaska and the rest of the United States. Despite the lack of a direct rail line connecting Alaska to the so-called Lower 48, rail and road freight are actively used to transport goods through Canadian territory. In particular, the Port of Vancouver, located in British Columbia, serves as a major transshipment hub for goods destined for and from Alaska. Many vital resources, such as food, fuel, and building materials, make their way through Canadian ports and railroads before reaching their final destinations in Alaska. For those who prefer to travel between Alaska and the continental United States by car or truck, crossing the Canadian border becomes an unavoidable part of the route. The United States and Canada share strong diplomatic ties, which greatly simplifies crossing the shared border, especially in the areas of trade, tourism, and personal travel. However, travelers heading to Canada must carefully comply with local customs and immigration regulations, ensuring that all necessary documents are in order in advance. Transit through Canadian territory plays a key role in ensuring connections between Alaska and the rest of the United States, especially in the context of energy infrastructure. Alaska, rich in natural resources, particularly oil and natural gas, uses Canadian transit routes to deliver these resources to U.S. and international markets. Through a system of pipelines and sea routes, Alaska's energy products are transported through Canada, supporting both the U.S. economy and the global energy balance. Overall, Alaska maintains close economic and logistical ties with Canada, playing a crucial role in trade, transport, and communications between the two countries. The trade volume of goods between Alaska and Canada is substantial, exceeding $1 billion annually. The trade turnover between Alaska and Canada reaches impressive proportions. Exports from Alaska to Canada are estimated at approximately $596 million, while imports of Canadian goods to Alaska amount to about $753 million. This economic activity supports key industries such as energy, fishing, and manufacturing, ensuring a continuous flow of vital goods between the two regions. Alongside land routes, maritime transport plays an indispensable role in maintaining connections between Alaska and Canada. The Inside Passage, a scenic and strategically important coastal waterway, connects southeastern Alaska with the province of British Columbia. This route is a bustling artery for commercial vessels, tourist liners, and passenger transport. Regular ferry lines, including those operated by the Alaska Marine Highway System and BC Ferries, provide reliable transportation links between coastal settlements in Alaska and Canada. These ferry crossings not only stimulate trade but also provide a vital link for local residents, especially in remote areas where land transport is difficult or impossible. Before continuing, it's worth pausing for a moment. If the presented material has sparked interest, a little support would be greatly appreciated. A simple click of the like button can significantly expand the audience, and sincere reflections and comments have an even greater impact on the channel's development. Thank you for watching, and now back to the main topic. Premier Tim Houston sharply criticized the imposed tariffs, calling President Trump's actions short-sighted and reckless. In response, the government of Nova Scotia took decisive action. First, American companies were barred from participating in tenders for provincial government contracts, and existing agreements were thoroughly reviewed. Second, tolls for American commercial vehicles on the Cobequid Pass were doubled, which was a tangible blow to transport flows. Third, alcoholic beverages produced in the United States disappeared from the shelves of the Nova Scotia Liquor Corporation, depriving American producers of an important sales market. In addition, a special reserve fund was created in the 2025 to 2026 budget designed to mitigate the negative consequences of the introduced tariffs. However, beyond these emergency measures, Premier Houston emphasized the strategic need to strengthen the domestic market, eliminate barriers to trade between Canadian provinces, and actively seek new opportunities in global markets. The Premier of Nova Scotia assured his constituents of the government's unwavering protection of their interests, urging citizens to give preference to Canadian businesses. In response to the imposition of tariffs, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith lashed out with criticism, calling the measures unjustified economic aggression. She warned of far-reaching negative consequences for both countries, predicting rising prices and job losses. Fully supporting the countermeasures initiated by the federal government, Smith stated Alberta's intention to present its own package of response measures within 24 hours. In her address, she emphasized the need for national unity, calling on all provinces to eliminate internal trade barriers and focus on implementing key resource projects, such as the construction of pipelines and liquefied natural gas plants. Smith also focused on Canada's vital role in strengthening international trade ties and increasing investment in national defense in the face of growing global instability. Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew demonstrated his province's determination to support the retaliatory measures, immediately ordering the removal of all American alcoholic beverages from liquor stores in Manitoba. This step became a symbol of the province's commitment to the principle of reciprocity in trade relations. In response to the imposition of tariffs, which caused a wave of outrage across Canada, Newfoundland and Labrador, Premier Andrew Furey issued a strong condemnation, calling the measures illegal and unfair. Without wasting time, he initiated a series of steps demonstrating firmness of intent. American products were immediately removed from the shelves of the Newfoundland and Labrador Liquor Corporation. Purchases of American goods and services were thoroughly reviewed with a view to complete cessation, and efforts to develop markets outside the United States, especially in Europe, were significantly intensified. Furey has announced the creation of a special roundtable on Canada-US trade relations designed to develop further response measures and strategies. In his address to the nation, he emphasized the need for unity, stating that Canadian identity, values, and sovereignty would be a reliable compass to guide the country through the turbulent waters of this economic confrontation. Across the country, Canada is accelerating diversification, seeking to reduce dependence on the U.S. market. To this end, existing free trade agreements such as the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership (CPTPP) and the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement between Canada and the European Union (CETA) are being actively utilized. Ottawa is encouraging Canadian businesses to redirect export flows toward Europe, Asia, and Latin America, offering generous grants and financial support to facilitate this transition. Provinces are also actively exploring opportunities in new markets, seeking to strengthen the country's economic resilience. In British Columbia, authorities are actively promoting the accelerated implementation of promising projects and persistently attracting foreign investors. The Atlantic provinces, in turn, are increasing exports of high-quality seafood to the European market. And while the United States would seem to be the most obvious and traditional partner due to geographical proximity and long-standing economic ties, systematic tariff threats from Washington have sparked a firm desire within the Canadian business community to diversify sales markets. Canada already has a number of preferential trade agreements with the European Union, many countries in the Asia-Pacific region, and Latin American countries. Government officials are urging Canadian companies to make greater use of these agreements to offset losses incurred in the U.S. market. It is hoped that increased exports to Japan, European countries, and other markets will at least partially compensate for the resulting deficit. Negotiations are underway with India and other developing countries, potentially opening up new horizons for Canadian exports. At the same time, Canada is seeking to deepen economic ties with Mexico and other members of the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, CPTPP, seeking to create a vast free trade ecosystem that either completely excludes the United States or at least significantly reduces dependence on the U.S. market. In these circumstances, Canadian manufacturers and agricultural enterprises are actively reallocating their resources, seeking alternative suppliers and exploring new export routes. American retailers are increasingly turning their gaze to Canadian and other foreign suppliers in search of alternatives to domestic goods. This reorientation process does not happen instantaneously, but the tariffs imposed add additional relevance and dynamism to it. Trade disputes between the United States and its northern neighbor have a long history. For decades, allied relations have been marred by numerous disputes, sometimes quite acute and protracted. One of the most striking examples is the Softwood Lumber War, which began in 1982 and has not subsided to this day. U.S. timber companies accuse Canada of unfairly subsidizing the industry and insist on the imposition of countervailing duties. The Canadian side, in turn, categorically rejects all accusations. This timber war has been accompanied by numerous rounds of tariffs, litigation, and temporary agreements, becoming one of the largest and longest-running trade disputes in bilateral history. Other chronic points of tension include Canadian dairy quotas, which restrict access for American producers, as well as U.S. country of origin meat labeling rules, which were eventually repealed after a WTO ruling. Throughout the history of U.S.-Canada relations, tariff wars have erupted more than once, like echoes of trade battles of years past. U.S. administrations succeeding one another have at times resorted to duties against their northern neighbor, provoking an expected reaction and a search for compromise solutions. Recall 1930 when the Smoot-Hawley Act sent American tariffs soaring on thousands of imports. Canada, then a key U.S. trading partner, was quick to respond, imposing higher duties on 16 categories of American goods. The result was mutual economic suffering and a sharp drop in trade volumes. Fast forward to 1971. President Nixon, in the midst of a currency crisis, temporarily imposed a 10% tax on imports, affecting Canadian goods as well. This move caused an uproar until a financial deal led to the tax being lifted a few months later. In 2002, President George W. Bush imposed tariffs of up to 30% on steel imports. However, Canada and Mexico were exempt due to their obligations under NAFTA. The steel tariffs were subsequently removed under pressure from international retaliatory threats and a WTO ruling against the U.S. This episode clearly demonstrated that large-scale American tariffs often face strong opposition. Between 2018 and 2019, President Trump's administration introduced significant tariffs on steel and aluminum imports, citing national security concerns. In response, Canada immediately implemented retaliatory tariffs targeting American steel, aluminum, and a range of other politically significant goods. This standoff ended about a year later when the U.S. removed its metal tariffs in exchange for certain concessions under the updated USMCA agreement. This episode provided an important lesson for Canadian leadership, demonstrating that decisive retaliatory measures can force the United States back to the negotiating table. Furthermore, it reinforced the value of a united front. Federal and provincial authorities, as well as industry groups, actively engaged with their American counterparts, seeking a resolution to the conflict. The successful USMCA negotiations between 2018 and 2020 shaped the current Canadian approach. Negotiators recognized the need for a firm response to Trump's brinkmanship tactics. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's statement in 2018 that Canada will not be bullied set the tone for future actions. A new tariff threat again prompted a swift and coordinated response from both Ottawa and the provinces. The broad tariff initiatives undertaken by President Trump's administration raise serious questions about their compliance with international trade law. In particular, the Canadian government expresses concern, stating that the imposed duties contradict both the letter and the spirit of the USMCA agreement, which was intended to eliminate tariffs on a significant portion of goods traded within the North American region. Unlike targeted disagreements over specific provisions of trade agreements, this involves large-scale measures, the imposition of a 25% tariff on Canadian imports. This leaves no doubt that such actions violate the fundamental principles of free trade that underpin modern international economic relations. Moreover, the steps taken appear to contradict key World Trade Organization (WTO) rules regarding most favored nation treatment and bound tariff rates. The only justification for such measures would be an exception based on national security considerations. It is likely that the U.S. administration will assert the legality of the imposed tariffs, citing national security exceptions enshrined in relevant trade agreements. President Trump declared a national emergency related to fentanyl trafficking and attempted to link Canada to this threat, arguing that tariffs were necessary as a tool to pressure the country to take action against cross-border drug smuggling. The imposition of comprehensive tariffs under the guise of medical or security necessity is unprecedented in global trade practice. Previous WTO rulings have shown skepticism towards the excessive use of national security arguments. Canada expresses concern that this constitutes an abuse of the rule's exceptions. In response to the U.S. actions, Canada is considering invoking the dispute resolution mechanism provided under the USMCA agreement. This process involves consultations and the possibility of a ruling by a panel of experts. If the U.S. refuses to remove the tariffs despite a negative ruling, Canada would be entitled to implement countermeasures. While a formal legal process typically takes over a year, Canada, seeking to protect its economy, responded immediately to the U.S. actions by imposing retaliatory tariffs. In addition, Canada may file parallel complaints with the World Trade Organization. However, as experience shows, enforcing WTO compliance is difficult in situations where the U.S. ignores panel rulings. As additional legal countermeasures, Canada may invoke USMCA provisions allowing for the suspension of certain trade concessions. This mechanism can be used in addition to formal disputes aimed at protecting the interests of the Canadian economy. The possibility of appealing to the national court system in connection with the actions of the American side should not be discounted either. While U.S. courts have generally shown deference to the president's authority on trade restrictions imposed under emergency powers, the most likely resolution to this conflict appears to be through negotiation and political pressure, rather than a clear-cut legal victory. That concludes our broadcast for today. Thank you for your attention and for spending your time with us. If you found this information helpful or interesting, please show your support by liking and subscribing to our channel to stay up to date on new content. Your engagement and support are incredibly important to us. And of course, don't miss the opportunity to explore other videos on our channel, one of which is already waiting for you on the screen.